Hey guys, so it's been a while since I brought a data video. Admittedly, I do have a lot of catching up to do in this current format, but for the time being, let's try our best to do this meta tier list by the data for this month, post Legacy of Destruction, post ban list, and of course, post YCS Rio. And again, a big congrats to Raphael for winning that event. And as usual, definitely go check out my discount codes for EU singles as well as supplies in the description below. And a usual shout out to Ivan as well as YGOProduct.com for keeping up with all of the meta related information in terms of tournament tops. So let's just get started with the tier list for this month. And so we do have Snake Eye as number 1. Of course, it's gotten a lot of YCS tops, regional tops. It's funny that, when the ban list first got announced, a lot of content creators, including myself, we thought maybe like the Fire King version would now take over, but clearly that was not the case. The ban list did not really shake up the meta as much as we thought perhaps, or rather would have hoped. Of course, we do have some new strategies coming in, and Snake Eye still incredibly strong. I just really don't like the Omega hand loop. I really wish that would go away, but for the time being, I guess that's one of the things we would have to deal with. We do have Tenpai Dragon that kind of narrowly edged out Voiceless Voice here. Now, it did not have as many YCS tops as Voiceless Voice, but Tenpai Dragon, for one, it actually has more regional tops, but also Dueling Book wise, it has a lot of play right now. Now, of course, the scoring weights a lot more to like YCS level event or, regional level in-person events. But at the same time, if you're kind of considering in terms of representation, Tenpai Dragon, you're probably seeing that a lot right now, just everywhere. And it's kind of funny because when this deck was just about to come around the corner, there were a lot of people who were saying, this deck isn't actually that good, it's very hit or miss. And perhaps that is technically still true, but at the same time, we are seeing a lot of it, and it's actually gotten pretty good success, especially like the most recent week as well, compared to like the first weekend after Legacy of Destruction. So this is definitely something to watch out for, and of course, especially post Infinite Forbidden, aka NAWCQ format, it's going to get even better. And then we have Voiceless Voice, which I just mentioned. There's also like Melodious Voiceless Voice now, which is kind of cool. And of course, they actually got their own direct support in Legacy of Destruction, get some more recursion and whatnot. So it did pretty well at YCS and also at the regional level. This is a deck that, before the ban list, it was like right there. Well, rather, it was the best deck after Snake Eye, and Fire King Snake Eye, of course, much farther back, but at the same time, it is still holding on to its spot. And then, of course, speaking of Fire King Snake Eye, so this is still around. Obviously, a lot of people thought this would end up being like the most popular and best deck, but clearly not, but still at least in the tier 1 conversation. So moving on to tier 2, we do have branded Despia. This is something that I actually thought would be kind of like tier 1 when the ban list was first announced, but now with, post Legacy Destruction, I guess perhaps not really the case, but at the same time, still pretty hanging on strong in terms of its standing. It is quite good, especially if you're a good pilot. And, Gimmick Lock didn't get banned, and it is actually quite nice, especially as, Tenpai Dragon become more popular, and it is an OTK kind of strategy going second. And if you're a deck that can just lock your opponent from being able to special summon, then you don't really have the fear of going first against something like Tenpai Dragon, rather than some decks may have to force Tenpai to go first instead to try to have a chance rather, and then of course they just like draw Heat Wave or something. So I think that is a pretty unique strength for branded right now. And then you have Melodious, which is not necessarily new. It's an archetype that already existed, but of course have become meta relevant very recently post Legacy of Destruction. So I think that's kind of cool how Konami can easily revive some of these older archetypes. This is a deck that I'm not too familiar with yet. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I do have a lot to catch up on for this post Legacy of Destruction format, but I have seen a lot of combos. I think it's like crazy actually in terms of also the kind of interruptions it can provide. There's like kind of non-targeting quick effect bounce, or let's say the D Crow effect, and they also happen to have like some protection effects as well, which is pretty nice to see. And then honestly, Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon has been one of my more favorite cards ever since I started playing Pendulum, so it's kind of cool to see that come and play, at least in kind of meta relevancy. Next we have Labrynth. Kind of same old, I guess. Good old reliable. I think I predicted it to be tier 2 when I first did a tier list when the ban list was announced, and I think it's kind of there still. D-Barrier, being able to tutor that was probably pretty nice, especially as we head into like Infinite Forbidden format when Tenpai Dragons become even stronger, and you have D-Barrier for something like Tenpai in terms of Synchro, let's say Voiceless Voice, Ritual, Branded, Fusion, even Melodious, I guess, with Fusion, so I think it's probably pretty decent. Next, we have Pearly. Had actually YCS success and also some regional level success so far. If you're going to play this deck, you should definitely go check out Dinkan Fam's channel. He's doing very well with this deck. And also, I did a recent profile with Jason as well, who finished first place post Legacy of Destruction format with Pearly. They do have Delicious too, and he also talks about, kind of like game plan in terms of going against Tenpai and setting up some towers and stuff to try to have a chance. So you can definitely go check that out as well. Next we have Stun. I'm using this runic picture to describe that. Technically the one that topped the YCS actually was Horus Stun from my knowledge, but most runic decks, or rather most stun decks that top are runic. It's just kind of like an unfortunate consequence, I think, with, you know, Snake Eye being so dominant for a while now, and just kind of like a cheaper way to have a chance. It's just, you know, can lead to some pretty easy wins, frustrating wins, or rather frustrating losses I should say, for the opponent. I'm a little salty against stun decks because I have a hard time going against this, but you know what, you can't doubt its power. I think it actually is definitely warranted at tier 2 level, which is not something we've seen in terms of stun decks being that high for this long too. So hopefully it also gets some more floodgates hit along the way, but I mean, I guess some would also argue that it's a necessary evil. Speaking of necessary evil, I guess, is also Flunder. This deck didn't get any kind of direct hits either, and you know, Shifter is still alive for some reason, so as long as that's around, and as long as you have a deck like, let's say, Snake Eye, where Shifter is pretty strong. Of course, Tenpai Dragons, though, as it gets popular, they also tend to play Shifter as well a lot in the main deck, so you know what, that kind of gets iffy sometimes, but nonetheless, I think Flunder can still hang in there. And then moving on to Rogue, but I think Kashira still belongs in tier 2. It just kind of briefly missed that mark this time around. It's another Shifter deck. You see kind of like Kashira Engine, a small package rather, and something like Snake Eyes now. It's pretty popular. So nonetheless, it's still very, very solid and a good option to pursue. And then we have Dark World, so this is going to be probably more of a temporary holding, really. I mean, because it did top the YCS, which is great, but, you know, purely from a representation standpoint, not a lot of players really play Dark World anymore, especially even at the regional level. There's some sporadic tops here and there every couple of months, but it's not that consistently topping. But nonetheless, for now, it will make this section. I wouldn't really put that much weight in terms of, you know, how high it is compared to other Rogue decks, just because it's kind of the YCS standing really inflates the score, but at the same time, I don't want to take away from the player that topped. Obviously it's incredible, and this deck can be definitely one of the more fan favorites. I know anytime I post a Dark World profile from someone topping, it always does super well. Very frustrating to play against, but you know what, as long as Droll is the main deck, they're probably taking that game 1. So next we have Yubel, which of course is a deck that I think myself, and as well as I'm sure a lot of others, thought maybe it would do a little bit better at this point. It did get some new support in Legacy Destruction, notable support at that, but regional wise, it hasn't done that particularly well. No YCS top either so far in the initial Legacy Destruction format. At the same time, they don't have their fusion yet, which I don't think we have confirmation on when that's coming out. I'm going to assume it'll be out for the NAWCQ as well, and at that point this deck will of course be much better, but you know what, for the time being I think it's sort of in this Rogue range, but I'm sure it's a very sleeper contender. So next, Centur-Ion, which is another deck that caught some new support in Legacy Destruction. They can they have a new synchro. They can also play under Shifter better and still, you know, have that Calamity Lock, which is very scary. But Shifter, of course, is very strong in this deck. Is a deck that can play a lot of hand traps to begin with, and it's got a very small compact engine, very consistent. And I think to be seen, I think they got even more support announced as well. So it's only going to get better. But I guess at least at this point, perhaps maybe some would have predicted, or rather expected, to do a little bit better. But at the same time, definitely not a scrub. Calamity Lock, very strong. So you know what, as long as that exists, I think I would still fear going against this strategy. Next we have Unchained, which is like the pure Unchained too, not really like, you know, of course Yubel plays Unchained cards, like Labrynth plays Unchained cards sometimes, but the pure version actually has gotten some regional top so far. I actually did one recently with Jamie, who actually was playing the Mayakashi Trap version with like Beatrice Sen, so I guess there's some different ways to play it, but you know what, I guess after that couple battles ago where it got, you know, Shavara hit to 1, it really tanked a lot, but I guess at least it's still getting some kind of regional level top, so all hope is not lost yet. So next we have Telements. This is a really strong rogue strategy. I mean, even with the Kelbeck Agido hits, it can still put up some pretty impressive boards. It's like multiple kind of negates. They always have like their backrow interruption as well. And so I think it's not something you can really doubt, but just kind of lost its sort of tier 1, tier 2 status. And of course, there's also going to be a lot of shifter kind of hanging around, like Tenpai Dragons. You have something like Flunder, Kashira. So that is something, and even Centur-Ion, as I mentioned. So that's not going to be like the best for Telements. And then you also have Spright, which, you know, coincidentally also happens to be from Powered Elements like Telements. I don't think it's as strong as Telements, to be honest with you, at least in terms of ceiling. You know, Telements can put up a much more impressive board. I just think Spright is, of course, a lot more consistent, can also play a lot more non-engine stuff, which Telements doesn't typically have that much room for. So I guess it kind of depends on your preference, but nonetheless, regional level wise, it's kind of okay. Hasn't done too well, honestly, in the last few months. And then you also have Chimera. This also has not that many tops, I guess, as maybe some would have thought, because they did get some new illusion support in Legacy of Destruction, like that one that's like anti-spell fragrance basically on legs. I did recently provide a Chimera profile that topped Montreal Regionals as well with Paul, so you can certainly go check that out. Obviously not kind of at the level of branded Despia, I guess, but I think it's still actually a pretty solid deck. And moving on to the final tier, we have Rescue Ace. This is like super weird to me. This has to be like technically the best deck to ever be put in like the other category in terms of my tier list, just because in terms of like, I feel like in terms of theory, in terms of strength, it is actually a pretty good deck. It's just that no one's playing it, and no one's played it since Phantom Nightmare kind of happened, with like Snake Eye being super strong. So you know what, it's really weird, it's perplexing. There's a lot of different decks that I think this deck can actually be better than, but you know what, it just doesn't see that much play, and regional wise just hasn't had that much success, and definitely no YCS level. And lastly, we have Salamangreat. This is a deck that was actually doing quite well post Phantom Nightmare and just before the ban list and just before Legacy of Destruction. I don't think much has really changed for them really, but I guess so far in this early days of the Legacy of Destruction format, not that many regional tops, but I'm sure if you can give it a little bit more time, maybe it'll start picking things up again. It does have some indirect fire stuff that it can make use of, as well as some more Cybers related cards as well. So you know what, you can never sleep on Salamangreat. They've made it and survived this far. They've gotten some ban list releases as well, so you know what, just keep an eye out for them. Anyways guys, that was it for the tier list for this month. Hopefully that was helpful in terms of providing a overall picture for this recent format so far. I have a lot to catch up myself, as I mentioned earlier. Anyways, big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to my Patreons and sponsors as always for the continued support, and well, take care guys.